Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Reaction to the federal budget is pouring in. There are numerous housing investments. We'll speak with a UBC housing analyst on whether those will be enough to address the crisis. There's also a new Canada disability benefit. We'll hear from an advocate on if that will lift people out of poverty. And we're asking you this hour, what is in the budget for you and what's not? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. And you can call us now on our top story this hour. What is in the federal budget for you and what is not? You can call us 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. If you'd like to email us, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Liberals all have had their views on the budget.
We are acting today to ensure fairness for every generation. We are moving with purpose to help build more homes faster. We are making life cost less.
Conservatives will vote against this wasteful inflationary budget that is like a pyromaniac spraying gas on the inflationary fire that he lit. It is getting too hot and too expensive for Canadians.
How is a Prime Minister going to guarantee that there's not massive cuts to services for Canadians with the cutting of 5,000 employees? How is he going to justify to people living with disabilities that $200 a month is enough to meet their needs? I need to hear a plan on that before we make a decision.
That's NDP leader Jagmeet Singh there that you heard last, not saying if he'd support the Liberals' budget. And before that, you heard Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, as well as Liberal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. Now, one of the biggest pillars of the budget is housing and the commitments there. And before releasing the budget, the government already laid out what it's calling Canada's housing plan, a pledge to, quote, unlock nearly 3.9 million homes by 2031. Well, is that enough? And is it fast enough as the housing crisis continues? Now, just before we came on air, I spoke to Alexandra Flynn, Associate Professor at UBC's Allard School of Law and Director of the Housing Research Collaborative.
Hi, it's great to be here.
What do you make of the spending that's been announced? Is it enough to address the housing crisis?
I mean, this is a big budget. This is a very firm, pronounced statement from the federal government that it is going to be front and center in addressing the housing crisis. There's a lot in this budget to unpack, but bottom line, this is a great step for housing from the federal government, and I think it shows great promise at being able to build housing quickly in the country.
Oh, what stands out for you? What gives you such optimism?
The identification of public lands, of federal lands, as the cornerstone of the housing strategy is a tremendous step. So these are underutilized lands that exist across the country, often in main urban centers. Think Canada Post offices that could have housing on top of it, that are just lying underused. And this commitment from the federal government is saying we need those sites to build housing, coupled with infrastructure investment. So billions of dollars over 10 years to focus on building housing on those sites and others. So, there's parts of the budget that I think could use some work, but these two pieces give me a lot of optimism.
And we'll get to what needs some work in a moment. When it comes to building on those federal lands, what kind of housing are they talking about?
So it's not 100% clear exactly what housing they're thinking of, but we have some clues in the budget. So we know, for example, that they've identified dozens of sites, 4 of which will have modular housing. Modular housing, of course, being, it seems, a faster way to have housing constructed. We also see that both the private and public sector are engaged in this plan. So we're not talking about strictly social housing at all. This is a housing plan that includes private partners as key players on these lands. So we don't know exactly the affordability that these homes will have, but the signal so far is that they're aimed at middle income Canadians.
When you look at that, we're dealing with homelessness crisis as well, along with as a consequence of the housing crisis. So we saw here in Vancouver some residents at the Crab Park tent encampment just earlier this week have had their tents removed as they were not in that designated area. Where and encampments are being seen around the province. So what is in the budget to deal with homelessness?
I would say that's the biggest weakness in the federal government's announcements. Um, Very little to address homelessness and the stark realities of an increasing crisis. We also see very little discussion of lower income Canadians. So these are the ones who are in most acute need, who simply cannot afford market housing. So I'd say, we have very good federal leadership in lots of areas, but not on this one.
And how concerning is that, given, all the effects of precarious housing and people living on the edge of homelessness?
So my sense of this budget, and if you sort of scroll down right to the very bottom, you see some wording on the intergovernmental nature of this crisis. And the federal government is saying, listen, we'll step up, we'll provide some really strong leadership in certain core areas, but we expect provinces and municipalities to still be at the table and to still be doing things to solve parts of the problem that the federal government sees as not within its jurisdiction. So my sense is that the federal government is signaling that it's really up to these other governments to be the ones who will show leadership on the homelessness file.
What do you make of that?
I mean, my view is that we need federal leadership in this area as well. Homelessness is increasing and has increased across the country. In my view, it's deeply tied to housing affordability. So I would have liked to have seen a lot more. I would have liked them to seize the federal housing advocates' suggestion or recommendation that there be an inquiry into this intergovernmental piece, exactly what government was going to do which part of the problem.
Mm.
So I'm disappointed on that front. But I'm buoyed by the other elements, and I hope that other governments are going to come to the table. If I may, certainly in BC, we've seen very strong leadership at the provincial level. And so perhaps this budget will be a signal to premiers that they need to be the ones who are really addressing the homelessness that exists within their provinces.
That's Alexandra Flynn, Associate Professor at UBC's Allard School of Law and Director of the Housing Research Collaborative. I spoke with her just before we came on the air. And we are asking you this hour here on BC Today, what is in the federal budget for you and what's not? You can call us all throughout the show, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Emmanuel is joining us from Nanaimo. Hi, Emmanuel. What do you see in the budget? Hi, Emmanuel. Are you there, Emmanuel? Doesn't sound like it. Okay, I think we've lost our connection with Emmanuel. Our number is again 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. I think we have Emmanuel now. Hello.
Oh, hi there.
Hi, what do you want to say about the federal budget?
Well, my comment here is I'd like to talk about the housing plan that they've got. And I think it's important for people to understand that for the Liberal government to think that Canada can build 3.9 million homes by 2031 is absolutely impossible. We've never, I'm in construction myself, and anyone that wants to look at data out there, the most unit that has ever been built in Canada on our best year is about 240 to 250,000 units across the country. So now the federal government thinks that we are going to build just under 600,000 units a year for the next 6-7 years. It just doesn't make any sense. We have labor shortage.
Right.
Plus, even on our best year, that has never happened. So that's the number one thing.
And is the labor shortage the biggest roadblock, Emmanuel?
It's just we just don't have the capability. It's just not possible. It's never been done before. You can't expect to triple our best year in construction overnight. This is just political promises that are not realistic at all.
And so providing federal lands, providing investments for loans and things like that doesn't.
Well, again, so that's the other part. They wanna help builder. Okay, so they're giving all kinds of subsidies through CMHC. Like the first part, I think they initially started with a $6 billion subsidy, and now they announced another $15 billion to help build rentals. But
the apartment construction loan program. Mm-hmm.
That's correct, but the thing is we're subsidizing publicly traded corporations, because a lot of those rental programs, a lot of the ones that are building rentals, are property management are built for property management corporations that are owned by publicly traded corporation. Example, Pinnacle Property Development is owned by Cushman and Wakefield. Cushman and Wakefield, the major stock owner of this corporation is BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund.
And so this loan program, it doesn't go far enough, or
it's a crony capitalism straight up, because you're just helping corporation getting richer, and it doesn't help anybody.
It doesn't help anybody if they have the capability loans to build more apartments.
So the government is subsidizing a corporation, so they're able to build at a cheaper cost. Mm-hmm. They also have access to cheaper money than anybody of us can get.
Okay.
If you go borrow for a mortgage, it'll cost you, if you're lucky, around the 5%, 5.5% mark right now. These guys can borrow money for 30% cheaper than anybody else. So combine that with tax breaks, subsidies from CMHC.
Okay.
These guys are only getting richer.
So you're saying
it's not going to drive the cost of housing down for anybody else. It's actually
what would you like to see then?
Unreachable.
Yeah. What would you like to see?
Well, it's hard to say, because we're so far into it. I just don't know how we're going to get out of this. For sure, we want to see affordable housing, because housing needs to stop being a speculative asset. It needs to, if you're a publicly traded corporation, you shouldn't even be allowed to purchase residential real estate. And you look at the government, what they're doing, like the zoning that is changing in British Columbia as of June, where any city of 5,000 inhabitants or more, single-family lot, residential lot, is going to be over. It's going to be multifamily zoning.
Right.
And you look at Vancouver, Burnaby, Richmond, if you're within 400 meters of a SkyTrain station, all of a sudden you can build 20-story buildings. I mean, who is that really going to help?
Who is that going to help?
The common folks.
Okay.
It's going to help a corporation. So we're living in a time where government is literally owned by corporation. The government is not serving the people anymore. And that is a perfect example of, again, like I said, crony capitalism at play. And I just personally, as a person, I feel powerless when I see my government behave that way. I feel like, we've lost control over our lives. Okay.
Emmanuel, thank you very much. It's good to hear from you. And, you speak as a person and someone in construction. And so good to hear your points there, your points that it's going to be impossible to meet that goal of 3.9 million homes by 2031. And in terms of where the funding and loan programs are being directed, you're taking issue with that as well. Thanks very much for the call. That's Emmanuel in Nanaimo talking about housing in the federal budget, asking you now here on the program, what is in the budget for you and what is not? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Tracy is up next in Penticton. Hi, Tracy. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show.
Sure. What are your thoughts on the federal budget?
thing that I feel they kind of dropped the ball on is the disability benefit, the Canada Disability Benefit. It works out to be about $200 a month extra, which is barely a bag of groceries anymore. It's also tied to the disability tax credit, which, I mean, there's thousands upon thousands of disabled people in Canada who are not eligible for the disability tax credit, but who are still living in poverty and disabled and unable to work or work full time or anything like that. And it's something that people with disabilities have been waiting and advocates have been waiting on for years for a federal disability benefit to come through. And, you know, disabled people are twice as likely to be living in poverty as average Canadians. So, sorry, I said that improperly. As able-bodied Canadians. And it just, you know, even during the pandemic when CERB came out and stuff like that, it was noted by the government like $2,000 is the very least amount that people should be expected to live on in Canada. And even with this top-up, it does not bring anybody across Canada's disability benefit up to $2,000 a month, except maybe in one or two provinces. And if so, it's just barely that. And as we know, you know, prices have gone up from everything since CERB was in place. So it's just, it's almost laughable. You know, it's almost, it's another little pittance that, you know, has been waited on for so many years, and it's leaving a lot of people in vulnerable positions, you know.
How does this issue affect you, Tracy?
You know, I've got disabilities. I've been someone who's had to rely on benefits off and on over the years. Sometimes I'm able to work, sometimes I'm not. And it's really hard to get out of poverty when every single cent that you have goes to just barely making your living expenses. Like, there's no room to breathe for people. And it's just, you know, this is supposed to be helping some of our most marginalized people step out of poverty, and it's not enough.
What would you have liked to have seen? Because you're right, the disability advocates had been calling for this. They were nervous that another budget would go by without a clear plan for implementing the Canada Disability Benefit. What would you have liked to have seen?
I think one of the big things is communication with provinces on, you know, people who are on provincial disability, who aren't necessarily eligible for the disability tax credit. You know, there's so many different things in disability. There's, you know, you've got your provincial disability, and it varies by province who's eligible for that. You've got CPP disability, which some people don't qualify, some people do. Neither of those means that you qualify for the disability tax benefit, and that's kind of arbitrary, it seems, from what I've seen and talked to with people, and also helping people fill out applications for stuff. That, you know, having communication, like if someone in your province is getting a disability check every month, then they should qualify for these benefits. But also, it's just, you know, it's, like I said, the sum is not enough and I mean, maybe with the housing changes, maybe, you know, if some of those other prices can come down, maybe if they can get a handle on the grocery, you know, inflation and stuff like that, then maybe the $200 for these select few people would be enough. But I think overall it really missed the mark and leaves a lot of people still in really vulnerable positions.
Tracy, really appreciate your calling in. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
That's Tracy calling us from Penticton, and we're going to hear from the group Disability Without Poverty in the next half hour. It's 12:25 now, 1:25 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today. Well, this morning, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau addressed his Liberal caucus and emphasized how the budget is aimed at helping young Canadians.
The people that are driving our economy, the millennials and Gen Z who make up the majority of our workforce already, deserve the same advantages. This is the challenge we need to meet, and our plan will meet this moment.
Well, CBC News spoke to young people in Vancouver about the challenges they're facing.
I think the housing crisis is a big one, just because with everything going on with inflation, it's really difficult to even manage your basic expenses.
Definitely lower gas and food. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know housing is difficult as well, but you know, people can share and stuff like that. But food, I mean, that's just, everybody deserves food.
Mostly like minimum wage is very like challenging for you to be able to like afford rent and afford groceries and everything. So it's very like you get what you are gonna spend all month, and you like don't have anything like else for you to like get like the small things that you want.
Thinking as like in the student aspect, something like scholarships or maybe funds, raising funds for people who can't afford it, and like, for example, making it into like little chunks or down payments for people to start paying off slowly.
They take so much taxes. I think maybe, I don't know, I would like to ask like where all the tax money is going, right? So maybe reinvest those back.
More housing centrally is really great. I like to see downtown development happening, not just so much urban sprawl. And for young people, I definitely like the 5% and 10% incentive that they gave to help with homes the last number of years.
Low interest rate would be good so that we can buy.
This is BC Today here on CBC, live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, and as well live on Radio 1 and CBC Television. We're asking you this hour, what is in the federal budget for you and what is not? And some emails here now as well to bctoday@cbc.ca. Haley writes, I'm a 41-year-old professional living in Kelowna. My husband and I each have a parent who is an immigrant, and we both had extensive student loans to obtain our professional degrees. We now have 3 kids and are in a position to invest in them and invest in the economy to hopefully finance our retirements. We are both incredibly sad that the current government sees our investments and our children's future as a piggy bank to entice people to vote for them. We are not the super rich. We have worked hard and been in debt most of our lives. The increase to the capital gains tax on the current investors in the economy and the additional debt burden for future generations is not a long-term solution to inflation and lack of affordability in Canada, but it does ensure that professionals and their children look to other countries to invest in and invest their futures in. And Haley is referring there to an increase in the rate, the rate inclusion, or the inclusion rate rather, when it comes to capital gains. And I believe it's above 250,000 that that rate increases to half from 3/4. So that that email is referring to that capital gains inclusion rate increase. Thank you for that. Diana writes as well, I was disappointed to hear that there's no government plan for tackling the outgoing strains on the nation's healthcare system as a priority in their budget. Langley wait times are ongoing for surgeries and diagnostics and other life-saving treatments. The emergency departments continue to struggle. What will it take to get the attention of the Liberal federal government and start putting on the front burner our struggling healthcare? Thank you for that, Diana. BC Today at cbc.ca. We'll get to more of your calls coming up in our next half hour. Right now, it's 12:30, 1:30 in the Mountain Time Zone, and time for a CBC News update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Transportation Minister Rob Fleming says his government will be providing TransLink with $300 million in new funding. It comes at a time when a growing population and higher operating costs have led to overcrowded buses and frustrated transit users. Fleming says the extra funding will mean more buses, longer hours, and more frequent transit service. A man who killed his 3 children in Merritt in 2008 is appearing before the BC Review Board today. The hearing hearing could determine whether Alan Schoenborn should remain in treatment or receive a conditional or full discharge. During his trial, the court was told Schoenborn was experiencing psychosis at the time of the killings. He has been held at the Forensic Psychiatric Hospital in Coquitlam since 2010. And a Prince George woman reported missing earlier this week has been found safe. McBride RCMP issued a release Monday after her abandoned car was found in the Robson Valley community. Police are not releasing any more details except to confirm she is fine. And now the forecast on the north coast. Sunny this afternoon with a high of 13. Highs to 7 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, some sun and cloud with a high of 8 degrees. Highs from 7 to 12 and mainly cloudy in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 12 as well. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, lots of sunshine this afternoon with highs around 16. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you so much, Rob Zed.
You are welcome, Michelle.
Robert Zimmerman. So Rob Zed, you know, do you say Gen Z or Gen Z?
Well, I was looking at the CBC language guide, and that says Generation Z. So I'm sticking with the Z.
You're sticking with Gen Z. I actually asked some of our colleagues, and they said Gen Z. Although anyone I know who's of that generation just says Gen Z.
Point.
And maybe because of social media, but I said Gen Z a couple of times yesterday, and I got a couple of emails saying, please say it the Canadian way, Gen Z. But it is a little bit of a dilemma because, in vernacular, people say Gen Z.
Yeah, I mean, I have a brother named Jay, so he certainly plays up the Z part. And
for his rap career?
Yes, that's right. And I had an English teacher who used to call me Zebo, and so that kind of morphed into Z. So Z is kind of cooler in a way, isn't it? Than somehow.
ZZ top. I haven't heard that. But
that wouldn't be good.
To be fair, our pronunciation guide at the CBC does say would say ZZ top.
Yeah, tip of the day, Michelle. Just say on air, say Z, and then, in your day-to-day life, just say Z.
Yes, because if I say Gen Z to my son, he'll just roll his eyes at me.
As he probably should.
As he does many, many times over many, many things. Rob, thanks very much.
All right, Michelle.
Rob Zed from the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1, live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. This is BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks so much for joining us. You can call us now on our topic for this hour. We are focusing on the federal budget that was delivered in Ottawa yesterday, and we're asking you, what do you see in the budget for you? And what's not in there? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Rick is joining us up next from Squamish. Hi, Rick. Hi there, Rick.
Oh, hello.
Yes, hello. What are your thoughts on the budget?
Well, when I first heard it, when I heard like the $17 billion or something for housing and stuff, I went, oh, well, that sounds encouraging, but I didn't hear anything for right now. I'll give you an example. I live in a small town in Squamish. Mm-hmm. You probably heard of it. We're building more than any other community in BC. We've got condos going up everywhere, all over. Not one of them is affordable. If you don't make $40,000 to $50,000 a year, you can't live there. Our average rent in this town for old places is $2,000 a month. I don't even get that much.
Yeah.
I'm getting $1,400 a month on disability total. That's with my CPP, my disability. So what I'm saying is, if we had the Olympics right now, I just mentioned this to your producer, that if we had the Olympics right now, there'd be housing everywhere. Because Whistler doesn't have the room, so Squamish would probably pick up the slack, and we'd bring in housing, we'd bring in all this infrastructure that we needed to get to house the athletes. What I'm saying is us homeless people need that type of attitude. We need emergency housing. We need trailers. We need something to get us off the streets, because I know I don't want to live in a tent. I'm close to living in a tent because the place I'm living in is for sale. And I have zero place to go. I've tried everywhere. I phoned BC Housing. I phoned everyone. I phoned the MLA, Raskaloon. I phoned every person I can. I've been on CBC with at federal on the in Ontario. I've been on everywhere trying to say we've got to do something now, because it's getting way worse than I've ever seen it.
Wow. And
so
I'm sorry,
I didn't hear anything in the. I didn't hear anything. I'm sorry, I didn't hear anything in the budget that's helping us right now. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, no, I hear you. And our guest earlier from UBC said as much, that while there was a lot for housing, not much to address the issue of homelessness, which is urgent and is current.
And as you know, it's illegal. I don't know if you know about the Crab Park situation. I've been down there. I've seen it. And it's pretty sad. They won't even give them washrooms there. They won't give them big garbage cans to throw their stuff away. They just don't want them there. They just keep saying, we don't want you here. We want to give back our park to our people. But there's no place for those people to go. And they would all go somewhere. If there was emergency housing or something where they could go and stay in a trailer or whatever, and then, you have a washroom trailer, a little kitchen trailer, everything, people would use that. Most people would, right? They don't want to live in tents. They really don't. Most people don't want to. I know I didn't like it. I did it 2 years ago, and it was hard. It was okay in the summer, but I still had to take my tent down every day and hide, and, I had to go to different places because I wasn't allowed to. Our town here has signs everywhere saying no camping, and there's only one camping spot, and you're only allowed to stay there a couple of weeks. So you have to hide outside. So I did it, but once November started, I couldn't do it. So I had to go to Lac La Hache, all the way, 200-300 kilometers from where I've grown up, because I couldn't get any housing in Squamish or Burnaby or Vancouver or anywhere. So I had to go to Lac La Hache and stay in a motel for 6 months that a realtor was renting out. And that was the cheapest place I could find. That was $900 a month. So.
And now you're in Squamish. So
I'm in Squamish, but I'm in a house that's for sale. So I'm renting a room with all my stuff is in bins. I've had my stuff in bins now for over 2 years because I sold my place, and unfortunately I'm crazy. I gave most of the money to my family and my kids, right, my grandson, and paid off all their bills and stuff. And now I've got maybe a couple $1,000s put away in a savings account for when I get a place. And I've been told, even my old age home here, that I have to wait up to 2 years, maybe 3 years before I can get in.
Rick, can I ask you, I know you've been speaking about the budget, but you also mentioned, that you have lived in a tent, you don't want to, but that people are being moved from encampment, to another encampment, and the feeling, the message is that we don't want you here. What would you like to say about the stigma that people who are homeless face?
Well, I just want to say this, that a lot of homeless people do have mental issues. There's no doubt about it, right? We've had homelessness in Squamish since I moved here in 1974, but a lot of those people they didn't want to pay rent. They wanted that freedom of living in a tent and that they gave that was their decision. Now there is no decision anymore. You have no choice. So what I'm saying to people is these people have no choice. They don't want to be in tents. If you talk to most of them, they say, no, this is horrible. It's a horrible way to live. You got to deal with rats. You got to deal with other people right beside you and stuff. It's just horrible. You have no privacy. You've got nowhere to go to the washroom. You got nowhere to clean up. You have to find a place. It's just a horrible way to live. And for our country to be like this, to say in our Constitution even that homes are for all Canadians, and then to say, well, you're on your own because you don't make enough money, it's wrong. That's what our town's doing. Our town in Squamish, like I said, I'm not exaggerating when I say you have to make $4,000 to $5,000 a month to afford rent here, because the cheapest place is $2,000.
Rick,
that's for a dump.
Yeah, I'm sorry that you're in this precarious situation right now, and I sure hope
I appreciate you listening, though. And like I said, all I was worried about with the budget, I mean, they're always talking about numbers and deficits and stuff like that, which I, as a layman, and most Canadians don't understand. We just say, if we have to spend money on housing, you're going to spend money on military. You're going to spend money when we have the Olympics. So let's spend money when we need housing now. That's all I'm saying.
We hear you, Rick. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That's Rick.
Have a good.
You too. Rick joining us from Squamish. Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 or email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, in the budget yesterday was the long-awaited Canada Disability Benefit, taking a step towards establishing a framework to lift people with disabilities out of poverty. But some advocates were disappointed by the funding that was allocated. And as you heard from our earlier caller, $200 per month as a maximum benefit for low-income Canadians with disabilities. Joining me now is Michelle Hewitt, Chair of Disability Without Poverty. She's based in BC but traveled to Ottawa for the federal budget and joins us now from there. Good afternoon.
Hi. Good afternoon, Michelle. How are you?
I am okay. I'd like to ask you about the disability benefit, but I could see you through our video connection reacting there to our caller in Squamish.
Oh, really? Rick, my heart reaches out to you. I mean, this is what we're here to talk about, right? He talks about needing $4,000 to be able to afford to live in Squamish. Well, let's think about our disabled people in BC who are on $1,458. Excuse me, I'm a little bit jet lagged here, and that average rent in Squamish is $2,000. So no disabled people living there then. And now we have the Canada Disability Benefit, which was meant to lift disabled people out of poverty line. In Vancouver, Squamish is $2,300, and the benefit is $200. So that takes them to $1,600.
Well, this has been a long wait, right? And advocates like yourself were worried that this was going to pass again, this budget, without any progress on the benefits. So, how are you feeling about it?
So you are correct. And a few weeks ago, we thought that this budget was going to go by with nothing in it. So there's a little bit more than nothing. And, it's set out some dates. It's set out that they're hoping to get money flowing by next July, which was the date that we had kind of got into our heads as well. But I understand incrementalism. I understand that the government says that they're beginning low and hoping to build. They say that they're hoping in the blurb that goes with the numbers to bring this up to the level of OAS plus GIS, which is in this, not quite $1,800, in the $1,700. Well, that is still below the poverty line. So the government has a piece of legislation for disabled people that is meant to take into consideration the poverty line and the additional cost of disability. And yesterday they say $200, and they say, but we want to bring you to the level of OAS and GIS. And I kind of, it's like, I'm not quite sure what happened there, because that is not lifting disabled people out of poverty.
The benefit would also apply only to those who access the disability tax credit. Who does that leave out?
Yeah. Oh, so that at the moment, we think, because there aren't hard figures on this, but we think in Canada, there are 1.5 million people that should be able to access this benefit from their age and their level of severity of their disability. The number of people who are currently on disability tax credit is roughly 300,000. So it's missing out over 1 million people. By my calculations, in BC, of the people who are on what we call here PWD, our disability assistance payment, there's 120,000 people on that. We're missing out 75,000 people that have already qualified, have been said by the province of BC that you have the level of disability that we're going to give you assistance. And as I say, there's 60% of those people aren't on disability tax credit. What it says in the budget is they're going to put money aside to pay for the medical forms to be filled in by doctors. Well, we also know that in BC, we have 1 million people with no doctor. And we know that our doctors are rushed off their feet. It's not like they're looking for extra work. And so we're going to pay them to fill in people's forms somehow, when we have already asked people to jump through hoops to be approved for disability assistance in BC for what we all call PWD. Why aren't those hoops good enough? Why aren't those hoops good enough for the whole kit and cabangle?
That does harken back to what we heard from our earlier caller in the first half hour, Tracy in Penticton, who talked about, what she would like is more of a more communication with provinces on how to streamline things. So where does this leave you now?
So the disability community has been getting in touch with, obviously media directly. They've been getting in touch with us and making their feelings known to us. And I would imagine and I would hope that pretty much every MP's phone line is pretty hot at the moment as well. This isn't the end, right? This is merely the beginning, right? And we have a lot of chances here to keep putting this pressure on. So at Disability Without Poverty, and I represent both nationally, and we have a strategy based specifically here in BC that we intend to keep telling our stories, because our stories as disabled people are simply unforgettable. One of the people that I talk to lives in long-term care, is left with $222 a month, because when you're in long-term care, the money is taken off the top of your PWD, and that's what you're left with for everything else. He is on a medication that costs $9 a day. He simply can't afford it. This $200 really isn't going to make that much difference either. He's still not really going to be able to afford it. Those are the messages that we need to get through. We need to explain the exact mechanics of how this does not work. Like Rick talking about housing and how those dollars don't work. The government can change these numbers anytime it wants to. Formal mechanisms, it has a full economic statement, it can change things then, but we see the government do it all the time. It can make a decision any day of the week. So the time for us to keep the pressure on is not over, it is merely beginning. It's funny, I was telling people I have a playlist while I'm walking Leo, my service dog, and one of the songs that came up the morning before I got on the plane was Tracy Chapman talking about a revolution, and the next sentence sounds like a whisper, and out loud I said, no, it sounds like a roar, and that's what this revolution has to be here. We commissioned, along with a food bank out of Toronto, an Angus Reid poll. And we'd done it before, and it told us that 88% of Canadians supported the Canada Disability Benefit. We just repeated it. 91% of Canadians now say that they support the Canada Disability Benefit. Canadians support it. Disabled people need it. The government need to get behind it.
Michelle Hewitt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you once again, Michelle.
Take care. Michelle Hewitt is chair of Disability Without Poverty. She joined us from Ottawa. Let's take another call now as we cover the federal budget that was delivered yesterday, and we're asking you what's in the budget for you and what is not. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And let's go to John now in Vancouver. Hi, John. Welcome. What do you think of the budget?
I don't know what to think of the budget, except to say that it looks like the government is addressing the issues and people are complaining anyways. So you go, well, you as a media spokesperson or host and your producer, well, we want to hear those discussions. And that's, I think you should be trying to find out, is there anybody that's happy about this? I mean, when the government spends money on this level, and you hear the TD Bank guy down in the States somewhere interviewed, and he says, oh, I think they're just throwing money away and everything. And I'm going, no, the Canadians are getting this money, the Canadian public. While we do have a thin veil of Gaza Strip spread over Canada with homelessness, I think that there's an opportunity to address it. And I think governments, Canadian government, is going to do it, and the other guys don't like it. So when the other guys, like the people who wouldn't give you that money, don't like it, you can bet you're doing something right. It may be a little late, but at least I'm optimistic when I hear that the number of houses that are built. And way you as the host asked a question of somebody at UBC on what type of housing, and the Prime Minister outlined that very specifically. Factory housing, single housing, where he's going to promote a type of housing that is built with quality control, and he articulated it very clearly. And understand why you wouldn't have heard that.
John, well, I think the question was also more about who is going to be living in these homes, right? And our guest was saying that this does seem to target middle-income people. And so I take your point. You're saying that the government is spending to address the housing crisis.
Yeah, there's so many people that don't know what they're talking about in this game. You know, and I liked the man who called from Squamish, but something odd happened, and I've heard this story twice. Somebody gives all their money to their kids, and then they go to the government and ask for, I haven't got enough to go around for myself.
Okay.
And you go, there's something wrong with that equation. Don't people do the math? I mean, and you know, I know a CBC person with $45,000 pension. He's living in assisted living for $1,000 a month.
Sure. Well, let's maybe stay away from, you know, individual stories, but, you know, your point overall, and I take your point that regardless of what the government is doing, there's going to be criticism. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we're getting some, going to make some headway. We need the housing. Let's get behind it.
Okay. John, thank you so much. That's John in Vancouver, and Rob is up next in Vancouver as well. Hi, Rob.
Hi there.
Yes, what are your thoughts on the federal budget?
Quick side thought. I think tomorrow's first topic should be the CBC language guide. Get callers about that.
I think so. You're right.
I do. I don't know if they're listening. I do kind of roll my eyes when I hear you guys say issue and schedule, because no one around here speaks like that. And anyway, but CBC's great.
Gen Z or Gen Z. Let me just remind people we had a little debate about Gen Z or Gen Z. Pardon me. Sorry to jump in.
I call it Gen Z because in this case it's kind of a name. You know, it's a name of a thing, and you know we still go around saying Z. We're still Canadians.
I take your point.
I
take your point.
The name Gen Z. Okay. To John's last point, like I think everyone who called in is not saying they're totally unhappy. Yes, it's great that Liberals are spending money in key areas, but it's really fair to question, you know, is it enough? Is it the right way? I think the fellow who called in, was it from Nanaimo, Manuel, who works in construction? I mean, he made some great points. Housing is the big topic. I'll try to be quick, but, you know, CBC has an article about 30% of home purchases in the first 3 months of 2023, according to the Bank of Canada. I suppose this is the most recent data that's available. 30% of home purchases in that time period were investors. It's probably similar every quarter. So in Canada, you know, not everything works when the market delivers it, right? It's the free market. We've realized that with healthcare. We've realized that with education. You know, we realize that with transit. We basically realize that with infrastructure. You know, government gives money, and yes, private companies bid, but, you know, we don't have private companies competing and building competing highway systems and road systems, right? It doesn't make sense. And I wonder if we need to start shifting our thinking really fundamentally about housing, because Manuel's point is the government is trying to do this kind of market-based approach. We're going to increase supply. Well, that doesn't happen overnight. And yeah, he's right. We have a huge shortage of tradespeople. Like, you know, even if there's people looking for work, if they don't know what they're doing, I don't want them building a house or a apartment building. And yeah, the world has to manufacture all the supplies. And yeah, why aren't they doing more direct money now for the homeless people? Like, I didn't hear any money for homeless initiatives and rent subsidies.
Rob, thank you very much for your point. Really good to hear from you again. Our last caller is Mark in Victoria. Hi, Mark.
Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. What are your thoughts on the budget?
Well, we didn't sleep very well last night, my wife and I. We're Generation X, since we're talking about generations. And we were raised we grew up during the downsizing post-Trudeau Senior with Chrétien, Martin, and Harper when it ended. The expenditure of dollars per person within the government was the smallest pretty much in Canadian history since the 1950s. We grew up not believing that there was anything waiting for us in terms of public pensions and help, and the help was continually getting cut. So we kind of we were all educated that you got to go out and do your own thing. You need to become a landlord, get a suite, buy an external unit. And so that's what my wife and I did. She was in the arts. I was self-employed. And we discovered last night that $100,000 of our retirement, we're now in our 50s like almost all Generation Xers are, in early 60s, and it vanished. And we had a really tough conversation this morning about having to spend more years working in order to acquire a kind of a salary at the end of our lives here that can handle our housing and our health care costs. That's well below the average Canadian income. This is not, we're not wealthy. So,
and this is because of the capital gains.
Because of the capital gains change. Because the numbers when we bought, Generation X, whenever they bought this, the numbers were smaller. So were our incomes. They were a fraction of what they are now. And we worked incredibly hard and were very good landlords, as many of our generation were. And this is a really generational hit to Generation X, who are now going to have to write down significant amounts of their investment properties, having been landlords to all these folks and providing affordable housing. Like some of our folks pay half the normal rent. And so this was there's an unintended consequence when everyone is crying out for more money to be spent, is that money's coming from somebody. And the assumption of that entire generation was we had to make it on our own. And that's a whole lifetime of hard work. I didn't pay off my student loan until my mid-40s. I didn't take a winter holiday until my mid-40s. And I'm one of hundreds of thousands of people who did that. And we all worked hard. We were good landlords. And now we got clobbered at the end. And you just can't recover from it.
I'm really glad you called in, Mark. Thank you so much. Good to hear your perspective on the impact of the budget on you. That's Mark joining us from Victoria. Thank you so much for all of your calls. It was just great to hear the range of perspective and views on the federal budget. BCtoday@cbc.ca is our email address if you'd like to tell us more.